Hello? Hello, and welcome to the pilot episode of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. I'm your host, Leon Wolf, contributing editor at redstate.com. We are delighted that you have decided to join us tonight on this Thursday evening for our regular weekly program. I'd like to take a minute to introduce my co-hosts who have been generous enough to be with us despite the fact that they have been promised and really have no hope of any sort of remuneration at all. So I want to thank them for taking their time out of their week to come and be with us. First of all, we have Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute. We're glad to have him with us. We also have Neal Doing of the Federalist joining us tonight. Jay Caruso of Pocket Full of Liberty, and F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. Glad to have all of you here with us tonight. And our show is produced tonight by Aaron Gardner, managing editor of redstate.com. We definitely appreciate his efforts as well. Of course, the big story tonight is the executive order on immigration that Obama has released, and he's given a speech about that. We're going to talk about that a little later on tonight, but we're going to stray a little bit off the beaten path, first of all, and talk about a topic that I think deserves to get some attention in the upcoming legislative session, and that is an area of reform that I think that the GOP can undertake to try to make some inroads with some unconventional Republican voters, some younger voters, and some civil libertarians, and that would be civil asset forfeiture reform. Civil asset forfeiture, for those who don't know, is a procedure that essentially allows police to seize your property if they merely suspect that the property was used in the commission of a crime. You do not have to be charged with a crime at all for the police to seize your property under this, and in fact, studies have been shown that almost 90% of property that is seized under civil asset forfeiture, the people who have their property seized are never charged with any crime at all. If your property is seized on a civil asset forfeiture, you have to go to court to try to prove that you're entitled to the property and get it back. And the kicker is, if what the property they take is cash, you're not allowed to use your cash to pay for a lawyer to help you through this process. So a vast majority of the property that is seized under civil asset forfeiture, people never even attempt to go get it back. And it has become, as you might expect, an area that is ripe for abuse by law enforcement agencies, who, under current law, are allowed to take the property that they seize, in particular money, and use it and put it essentially in their own budgets without going through the regular taxation process. And I think that this is an area that the GOP can undertake in the coming legislative session. I know people expect there to be a lot of gridlock, not a lot of things to get done, but I think that this is an area where we might be able to surprise some people and put forth a bill that will, at the very least, put the Democrats in a difficult position. One of the problems that they have is that there has been a long-standing uneasy alliance between two of their more loyal groups. You have the civil libertarians, the young people, some of the folks who are suspicious of the police, and then you have the police unions, who have historically been some of the biggest and most staunchest backers of the Democrat political machines, especially in the larger cities. And I think that forcing this issue to the front can get the GOP in a good position for little political cost and make it difficult for the Democrats to move forward. And I want to throw the discussion on this topic, first of all, to Scott, because I know the Cato Institute has done a lot of work and a lot of research on this, and I know that Rand Paul is one of the guys, I'm not a personal fan of Rand Paul, has brought some legislation to the floor in, I think, 2003 that was never even actually brought to the floor. He attempted to bring it to the floor, it was blocked by Reid, to get some reform to the civil asset forfeiture procedure. Scott, is this something that you think that the GOP can and will tackle in 2015?
Well, I hope so. I think that if you look at some of the focus of Rand Paul's agenda, you'll see that criminal justice reform is very high on the list. He spent a lot of 2014 digging into the issue. And as you mentioned, it's been something that Cato has been working on for decades. The issues of civil licensure reform, certain aspects of prosecutorial discretion, death penalty issues. There's a lot of very ripe area for reform, and things that would just, beyond civil asset forfeiture, things that would really curl your toes, things that make for great narrative, a very, very good platform to kind of brand a new GOP. The issue, of course, is where you're going to find law and order conservatives in this plan. But it seems more and more like the grassroots are supportive. And, if the GOP were smart, Lord willing, they will do something about it.
Jay, I want to turn this over to you. What if we're going to see some reform come down the pike on this issue or other law enforcement issues? What sort of form do you think that can or should take? Jay, I think you mute
my mic. You mentioned the police and law enforcement. I unmuted. Where you really want to go with this is go after the IRS. This is another area where the IRS has abused their authority. Very, very recently, there was just a story in the New York Times where a woman who owned a restaurant, she was making deposits of less than $10,000, and the IRS flagged this, and they basically seized her bank account with $33,000 in it and just took it and said, it's ours because we think you're doing something illegal. And it was just, it's similar to what you were talking about. There's really no forum for them to say, here's what I did. This is why it wasn't illegal. Give me my money back. I mean, it's very difficult for people to do. And if there's any kind of organization that people dislike, the IRS, and you could start there. I think even before, you could find inroads. I think probably more with the African American community in terms of civil asset forfeiture. I lived in Florida for 14 years, and there was a big scandal down there in Volusia County. Sheriff Vogel, for a time, was using civil asset forfeiture, pulling people over on I-95, and they were getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, just taking money on a whim. And like you said, because it's so expensive, it's so time-consuming to try and get it back, most people just give up. And so the government just winds up with thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in their coffers. You hate to use. I don't like to use the term populist. I'm not really something. I don't really care for that term. But I do think it's something where you can go and you can kind of stoke some anger out there and put Democrats on the defensive. I mean, you have to continue to do that. They were the ones defending the IRS through this entire scandal, and they have to keep pounding at that.
Neal, kind of the issue that brought this to my personal radar, and I'm going to ask you about this, was the issue, I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago, was actually the stripper from California who was traveling cross-country to invest money with her friend. She was going to start up, a bar or restaurant or whatever the case was, and she had, in her suitcase a whole bunch of, ones and fives and tens of questionable sanity or sanitation in her suitcase there, and the cops pulled her over and they said, can we search your car? And she made the biggest mistake anybody ever makes, which is to say yes. And the cops opened the briefcase and they're like, well, you have all this cash, and she explained, she told her story. She's like, I've made all this money, and it was like $2 million in cash. I've made all this money, stripping. I've saved it in my mattress. I'm going across the country. I'm starting this bar with my friend, and that's what the money is for. The cops didn't believe her. They seized her money. It took her like 2.5 years to get this money back. Now, I think that a lot of people understand inherently the abuse that's present in the system, but the problem that you have is from a PR standpoint. Right. Many of the people who tend to be the poster children for this are people who are going to be on the wrong side of sort of law and order conservatives and where they might otherwise be. Is that a problem that you think would be surmountable if the GOP decides to tackle this issue?
Oh, definitely. I think there are enough people, especially with the recent stories of overzealous police actions, raids, that sort of thing on people who had nothing to do with the crime the police were investigating. I think it's going to be very possible to find sympathetic people who maybe have made mistakes in their lives and have been put in difficult situations because of that, but who do not deserve to have their property confiscated, who deserve to be compensated for that. You see this abuse is sort of endemic here with some of these stories. I think, what was it, Philadelphia is being sued because they've confiscated something like $6 million over the course of not even sure how long, a few years, but they, it's increasingly clear from some of these stories that in some small way, police departments are banking on a little bit of this to pad the budget. They don't consider it part of their official budget, but it, money, as we know, is fungible. So if the police departments are allowed to keep these funds or this property and auction it off, they can benefit materially, or they can free up some funds for things like tear gas or armored personnel carriers or something like that. So I do think that politically it's feasible. I think that it's an attainable goal. The Republicans, of course, aren't going to be able to do anything dramatic over the next 2 years. They're not going to be able to repeal Obamacare, but they could make some adjustments to existing laws and make people's lives better.
So, Bill, I want to hit on something that Neal just touched on. Let me play devil's advocate on this issue here for a second, and let me come with the police union response to what any reform package definitely would be, which is going to be, look, if you do this, your whole deal is to take this money away from us. That's going to impact our budget. That's going to reduce services, and ultimately, if you want to keep the same level of services, you're going to have to raise taxes. Is that a legitimate response to this area of reform, and is it something that you think should be considered?
Well, I think it's and I just want to start off by apologizing to all my cousins who are New York City police officers who probably aren't going to like what I'm about to say. But when we look at this issue, the role that the role that civil asset forfeiture plays in budgets is really not. It doesn't contribute all that much to the greater police department budget. So that I think that's kind of an empty argument, because if you're deriving less than 1% of your annual budget from civil asset forfeiture, you're really not making too big of an budgetary impact. Now, in terms of what Neal was saying, finding sympathetic characters, C.J. Ciaramella over at the Washington Free Beacon, he actually went to the Philadelphia civil asset forfeiture court and listened to some of these hearings, and one of the easiest and most sympathetic characters he met there was a woman who let a friend who was a criminal borrow her car, and her car ended up getting impounded and taken away, and she was denied this for weeks, and sadly she was shot and killed by a stray bullet in a drive-by before she could ever get her car back. But finding these tangentially related characters who have had their property confiscated just because they of their associations, kind of like, I don't know, how Deshaun Jackson was dealt away from Philadelphia just because his cousins were members of gangs in LA, just like everybody else in LA. I feel like you could really hit on I guess tug at the heartstrings of the American public if you showed them people who are just ordinary law-abiding citizens who have had their stuff stolen from them. That is a very much easier push than going and focusing on a stripper who claims to have made $2 million in 2 years. That's how often was she dancing? I don't know. That sounds like a lot of sets to me. But in terms of in terms of where I think we go wrong in attacking this strategy is everybody loves police auctions. It's like the only place in the world you can get a souped-up Cadillac for like, you know, $1,800. So I feel like we should, you know, allow the cops to still seize cars so that we can get them on the cheap, but we should give back money to people. What do you guys think?
Well, in a lot of cases, and I had a video that I posted on this at Red State a few days ago. Here in Tennessee, one of the news channels ran kind of an expose on this a couple of years ago, and the state has actually gone out and purchased a lot of these, you know, interdiction vehicles, these giant SUVs, and they sit them on the interstate. You know, I-40 is kind of the main interstate that runs east-west through Tennessee, for those who don't know. And they showed, they talked to the guy who's in charge of the program, and he, you know, came out right out and said, we expect to find the money flowing east and the drugs flowing back west, or vice versa. I don't remember which the particulars of it. And they said, well, they pulled the records of the actual stops that they had made, and they said, well, if you're trying to stop the drugs, you would expect to find them on the drug side of the road. But of the 31 arrests that they pulled in this 1 month period, literally all 31 were on the side that they expected the money to be going on. I mean, so the justification that they're trying to, you know, seize actual drugs here seems to ring a little hollow in some of these cases. But we've talked a lot about this and brought up some interesting points, but I want to move on to another topic for time reasons and get on something that's a little more pop culture. Many of us here are users of the music service Spotify. For those of you who don't know, who might be watching, Spotify is a service. You can have it for free on your laptop, and it allows you to stream basically any song or music that you want to have, or you can pay a subscription fee and you can take it with you mobile and use it in your phone. It's a service I love. I pay the monthly premium fee. It's introduced me to a lot of music. It's been, by all accounts, a huge driver in the growth of the music industry. It's introduced people to a lot of artists that are somewhat off the beaten path. It has its own radio service, kind of like Pandora does. But it was in the news a couple of weeks ago because Taylor Swift, who's, of course, a major recording artist, Scott's favorite artist, I know, in the entire world is Taylor Swift. I know he's got the poster just out of range of his camera there. She decided to announce that she was going to pull all of her music library from Spotify, which, of course, anytime someone who sells as many records as Taylor Swift does something like that, it makes waves in the music industry. She was followed later on in the week by a couple of the other country artists from her music label, and Time Magazine has reported that in the wake of that decision, they're contemplating pulling all of their artists from Spotify and starting their own separate music service, which of course would have a devastating effect on the service of Spotify. Since Taylor Swift has pulled her music, and her stated argument was, look, they're not paying us enough for the songs that they stream, number one. Number two, there's a lack of transparency in how they're paying the artists, and we don't believe that the counts they're providing us are accurate. And so she says, you know, look, I'm standing up. It's not for me. I've made more money than I could ever possibly use in my entire life. It's for the smaller artists who are getting squashed by the economics of Spotify. Since she has pulled her music from Spotify, however, she has announced that all of her music will be released on Google's competing product that they're going to start offering called Music. And so the cynical view of that is, well, look, she's not really doing this for the small artists. She's doing this to exercise her market power to move people to a competing service. Apple has also announced that part of their acquisition of Beats by Dre is that they're going to start pushing that streaming service through their iPhones with the new release of iOS. And so what you're looking at here potentially down the road is kind of a balkanization of the music streaming industry, where some artists are on the Sony service, some artists are on Spotify, some artists are on Apple and their Beats product that they're releasing. And Scott, what I want to ask you is, do you think that the music streaming model can survive that balkanization of their product? I mean, if customers have to choose whether they get Music Key and that slate of artists, or Beats Audio and that slate of artists, or Spotify and that slate of artists, and each has their own significant staple of exclusive artists, will they continue to pay for it? Are we going to go back to the bad old days where everybody just stole their music from Napster?
Well, I think not to sound trite, but the market will figure this out. This is not something that is insurmountable in terms of finding a proper balance between the demand for streaming music and the ability to supply it. However, look, if it turns out that that this model doesn't work, I'm pretty confident something else will. The piracy is an issue, but it seems to be less and less so as the market has advanced. Now that you have whether it just simply be iTunes or the streaming services, the economics have figured out, the market has figured out a way to have some sort of revenue stream. The question just becomes, where are you going to find that right balance? I'm very confident that it will work itself out. It's just we just happen to be living through the process.
Jay, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I mean, as a free market capitalist myself, I don't care that Taylor Swift removes her crappy music from Spotify. What bugged me about what she said was that she compared Spotify to piracy. And it's like, that's wrong. Even if you have the free service, you have to listen to ads from time to time. I pay the premium cost, so I pay $10 to not listen to her music. And the other thing is that what bugs me is that if she wants more money, then just say you want more money. Don't try and make it seem like it's this. I'm doing this for the little guy, and no, you're not. You want to get more money from these streaming services, and that's great. Just tell me, but just tell everybody. You're not doing it for the smaller person. You don't give a rat's ass about that little artist that's down there in Nashville that's struggling to try and get a record deal. I think what Scott says is right. I think the market is going to work itself out after some time. We just have to hope that the record labels, as stupid as they've been over the last 15 years, don't start their own streaming services. They did this with. They've already tried this and they flopped at it because it only worked on certain devices. They tried doing this. I think it was probably about 10 years ago, and it was terrible. The service is terrible. You couldn't bring the music with you anywhere. It wasn't mobile. It was just awful. So I don't really care if Spotify and Apple Beats and RDO, they want to kind of compete and see who gets the better artists. That's fine with me. I think the competition is always going to be good for the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But just stop bitching about you're doing this for your artistic expression. You just want more cash. I think the payout she said was over the past year for her something like was $500,000 or something like that, which is probably not a lot of money. She probably made more money than that in the first week of her new album when it came out. But hey, if you want more money, just say it. But like you said, Leon, this kind of service also opens up opportunities for a lot of bands who may not have been heard before, probably wouldn't have been heard before. If you get some band that's playing in St. Louis somewhere, I'm never going to probably see them. But if they're on Spotify and somebody's listening to them, I might check them out, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, a new band. So and then and here's the last thing I want to say on this. If the music is good enough, I'm happy to pay the Spotify fee each month. But the other thing I'm willing to do is, if it's really good, I'll go out and still buy a CD. If, for instance, for example, Foo Fighters' new CD just came out. It's on Spotify. I've been listening to it, but I went out and I bought the actual CD as well because I wanted to. I'm one of those kind of music people who wants to read the liner notes and all that kind of goofy stuff. So I'm willing to spend the money in addition to paying for the streaming service. It's just more of it. The streaming service is just convenient. I could listen to it offline if I want to. I could take it with me. I could listen to it through the car. It's just a great service to have.
Well, there is a tension, though, Neal, wouldn't you agree, that exists between that level of exposure that you get from a service like Spotify that allows people just through word of mouth over the internet to experience new music and new artists and helps to grow the industry, and the economic model that it promotes, which is to say that for the longest time the record companies fought against one thing that they viewed would be the death knell of their industry, which was the unbundling of songs. For the longest time, the record industry was able to demand that you either paid $12 or $15 for the entire CD, or you got nothing. Maybe you could buy a cassette single, something like that. But by and large, what you were going to pay is you're going to pay $15. Somebody came out with a hit song, you paid $15 for their CD. Mm-hmm. Now, Then it moved to the iTunes model. You can buy a single song for $1.19 or 99 cents or whatever it is. And now it's even smaller than that. It's an incremental portion of that paid kind of per however long it takes the song to wear out and your own personal music tastes. Sure. And what the record company has long said is, look, this is going to have an economic effect on our ability to deliver music, and they have, of course, experienced massive, job losses like every other sector of the economy. But one area that they've always fought to keep the same is in their payment of the artistic talent. And what they're saying now is, listen, we're coming to the point now we're going to have to, these artists are going to have to accept a major haircut. They're kind of the last line item on the budget that we have to cut. And won't that, in the final analysis, reduce the quality of artistic talent that's available? Because in the end, I don't know if I'm sure everybody knows somebody who's been in a band. It's a life that sucks. You make no money. You travel around. You're on the road. You play in these crappy little clubs in front of 20 people for years and years and years in the hopes that one day you're going to get rich off of one song. Mm-hmm. If that incentive goes away, people are going to give up much quicker. You're going to have fewer and fewer artists who break through and reach the public consciousness. What do you think is the answer to that tension?
Well, I'm maybe not the best person to ask because I don't even know how to use iTunes properly. I use Pandora a little bit. I kind of just subject myself to the whims of fate there. But I do think that it may actually go the other way there, Leon. I think that if the artists, if it comes to an economic reality that the record company simply can't pay these people as much as they have been paying, it might actually give us more diverse talent. A lot of this stuff today sounds the same to me. It's a little overproduced. It's just kind of ugh. So perhaps it would make people a little hungry as well. So the artists that are out there, because they have to work harder for that payday and to stand out, they might actually really go for some real art instead of just the dreck that they churn out. It's kind of mass-produced. So I can see it going. I can see it going the way you describe it. I can also see it perhaps being beneficial to the artist, because I think once the artists become complacent, then they stop to producing good art. But again, my opinions are suspect on this because I haven't bought a piece of music in 5 or 6 years. So
Neal's opinions are always suspect.
Yes.
Thank you, Jay.
That's an assumed fact. Well, Scott, I think, and I'm gonna skip you, Bill. I'm gonna come back to you, Bill, on this. But
I feel very strongly about Taylor Swift. I can't believe I'm being denied this opportunity.
I apologize. The issue is not her per se. To me, though, Scott, I think the exact opposite is going to happen of what Neal just described, which is to say, it's very cheap and in fact profitable for the music companies to create artists in a specific way, which is the way of American Idol and The Voice, right? Not only do they not have to pay that money to research, they make a ton of money by having these television shows where these artists come and line up, and we put them all through a process where everybody votes on them, and they produce this mass kind of plasticated crap. Well, what do you think about it? Do you think that it's going to have a positive or negative influence on the quality of the music?
Sorry, was that to me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Well, so I'm having difficulty sympathizing too much here. These artists are getting to do what they love, and getting paid anything is above what we lawyers drudge through every day, and a lot of other people drudge through in their daily lives. The luxury of doing what you love for a living is pretty darn great. There's also a lot of people that would do this stuff for free, whether it be singing in front of thousands of people or just getting a reaction from a crowd. So there is a part of this that is, not to sound like an anti-capitalist, but there is a part of this that is not just about the money. There's a lot of value that they are receiving from the sheer joy of playing and of doing this. So, I mean, it's difficult for me to get too worked up about the system as it is, especially because this is a voluntary thing. It's not like the record companies are forcing these people, or Spotify or whoever are forcing these people to do this. They're doing it because they love to do it. They want to do it. And again, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the balance, there will be a balance there. You'll lose some, but you'll maintain a lot.
Let's move on then to the big news of the hour, which is, of course, the long-anticipated executive order for immigration that Obama has announced today. It has been anticipated for many weeks that this would be a sweeping executive amnesty. It's been much talked about and discussed and debated. If you look at it tonight, and I've read the particulars of it, and we'll go to Bill first, and we skipped him on the last topic, it looks, at least from a conceptual standpoint, to be a relatively modest proposal that the president is putting forth. Essentially, if you were in the country before 2010 and you have a child, or if you were before the age of 16 prior to 2010, you're allowed to essentially apply for exemption from deportation if you fill out the proper paperwork, pay a fee, so on and so forth, pass a background check, pay taxes, so on and so forth. And what I want to go to you, Bill, first is, what do you think about the breadth and scope of this executive order as compared from what we were led to anticipate based upon what came out of the Obama administration and how it was reported and reacted to in the media?
Well, the breadth and scope isn't the issue right here. The issue is how the president went about doing it, and how he went about doing it using executive privilege rather than working with the legislature to get this passed is frightening, even if the proposal is more modest than was expected. And in looking at what the administration had tried to do with comprehensive immigration reform beforehand, I mean, it wasn't just if you were here before 2010, you can come out of the shadows and life will be great. They were actively, ICE was actively telling people who had been deported, hey, you can come back to the country and, we'll get you in through the back door the same way as you would have if you were never deported in the first place. So this is an administration that has thwarted the enforcement of our existing laws, and the people who are going to pay the price for this are not just low-income, blue-collar workers, as we often talk about in the press. It's the people that it hurts the most, illegal immigration, are recent immigrants who have come legally. So the people who got by through Ronald Reagan's amnesty back in the mid-'80s, these people are going to be absolutely hammered in terms of their earnings and the amount of money they're going to lose in a loose labor market. So these are absolutely things that we should be looking for in the president's approach to amnesty. And even though it is limited to children, limited to focused on family reunification, these types of I guess a vague enforcement. Once we toss the enforcement of this to various federal agencies, I'm sure they're going to have lawyers there who will come up with very creative ways to expand the pool of eligibility beyond the 5 million that are expected to benefit from this right now.
But isn't it, Scott, as a fellow lawyer here, isn't it, in fairness to the president, within his authority as the chief executive, at least within some amount of leeway to choose the extent to which he enforces the law? I mean, I know that it's passé to say that, but doesn't he have at least a constitutional argument that he has some leeway and discretion in the enthusiasm and the manner in which he enforces the law? I mean, by and large, most people in this country, including conservatives, were largely silent when he announced that he would not enforce the provisions of the Controlled Substances Act with respect to marijuana when Colorado announced that they were going to legalize marijuana. He just summarily announced, I'm not going to enforce that in the state of Colorado. Nobody blinked an eye. Because it's understood, I guess, under his constitutional authority that he has the ability to do that. Do you think that what he's done tonight and what he's announced tonight falls within that kind of inherent discretion that the president has?
Well, I think there's really two questions. The first is whether I think fundamentally he has the authority, and the second is whether we're just too far gone in terms of past practice to go back. And so I think first, fundamentally, with respect to being kind of a strict constitutionalist, a strict construction guy, as we crazy libertarians tend to be, is that no, he doesn't have the authority. This is against the express will of the Congress. It violates separation of powers, and it is fundamentally unconstitutional. The problem is that we are so far down the rabbit hole with respect to executive authority and abuse of executive authority, going back decades. Republicans as well as Democrats. So now, because the dam has long been broken, we're now just debating how much water we let through, and that's really the problem here. I read an article just today about there was a meeting of the Federalist Society just last week, and here we are, a bunch of hardcore conservative lawyers and jurists, and pretty much everybody on this panel agreed that, look, because of past practice, it's okay, no problem that for the president to do this, even though fundamentally, with respect to the letter of the law, there might be a problem. At this point, the omelet has been made, the eggs have been broken, and you can't unscramble them. And I don't really know how you fix that at this point. I joked today that maybe Obama's doing us a favor by so breaking the system that we really have to rebuild it from scratch. But even that is a pretty Pollyanna view.
Well, Scott, what's very interesting about that is if you look at the check that the federal courts have had on past practices, say the Noel Cannon case last year, when we look at recess appointments, we always thought, hey, everyone's been doing it this long, even if the Constitution says this, who would ever rein it in? Well, it turns out that the D.C. Circuit was willing to rein it in, and the Supreme Court pretty much affirmed that entire decision. So it does seem like this is a judiciary that's willing to, if handed the right case, is willing to provide a check, and that's a welcome development.
Well, and it's to me, it's kind of a different question that we're looking at here.
And don't get me wrong. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, again, that kind of is a ideal solution in terms of the courts retaking some of this lost fundamental power, or at least separation of powers. And I'd be thrilled. I'd be thrilled for the courts to revisit a lot of jurisprudence from the last 60 years or so in terms of state power and separation of those powers. But it is a very, very steep hill to climb just in terms of what has been done in the past, because you're not really talking about bright legal lines. You're talking about shades of gray with respect to just the degree of the breach.
Yeah, and I'm gonna throw this particular question to Jay, because I mean, whatever we think about the legal ramifications, I think Scott is correct, and I think anybody who's practiced law for any length of time knows. I mean, the United States Code is a mess, and it's a behemoth. I mean, if you've ever worked in a law firm and you go in and just the section of the United States Code in the library takes up 3 bookshelves, right? And that's not to count all the federal regulations and other things. And a lot of stuff that's bad on the books never gets rewritten. It's just left in there. And I think that realistically, asking someone to say we're going to enforce every provision of every law with the fullest enthusiasm that we can is not something we can ever go back to without a very significant modification and revision of the code. So that having been said, as we talk about past practice, we talk about the Supreme Court's acquiescence and these sort of things. Whatever you think about it legally, is it fair to say, Jay, that this is doing this sort of action on this kind of issue that is the topic of a present and live political debate in the Congress shifts the balance of understood power between the two branches, regardless of what you think about whether it's legal or not?
Well, And Barack Obama clearly believes that, because if it's the part of the speech that I watched tonight that I suffered through, he says, well, I wouldn't have to do this if you guys would just pass a bill. And the whole idea is this is the constitutional professor himself, who doesn't seem to understand that just because you get into office doesn't necessarily mean that Congress is going to pass the bill that you want. The separation of powers is there for a reason. You don't get everything that you want. You had your chance in 2009, 2010 to ram through everything that you wanted. Now you can't do that, so you can't turn around and sit there and say, I'm going to change the rules, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it on my own. Now he's going to go ahead and do it anyway. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later. The Republicans are going to be too darn afraid to not fund any of this and invoke a government shutdown. That's not going to happen. So you're at a point, I think, where you get back to, we were having this debate last night talking about, well, what do you do? And Gabriel Mallard, an attorney, another crazy person like you and Scott, wrote an article saying, hey, Republicans are just going to have to embrace this. And when a Republican is elected president, just go for it. I mean, if Barack Obama is doing it with a stroke of a pen, couldn't it be undone with a stroke of a pen? I would imagine. But there may be other areas where they're going to have to do it. I think you're probably right. You're at a point where now it's just a political battle. The legalities of it, I don't think are going to matter much anymore. I don't know if you think this lawsuit that the House of Representatives is filing is going to do anything. I don't know. Is the Supreme Court going to step in and say, are they going to do anything? I doubt it. So I think at this point it's a political battle. Who can make the case better that doing it is the right thing to do, as opposed to somebody saying it's the wrong thing to do. Now, in terms of polls, this is not very popular amongst the American people. So, but Barack Obama doesn't care because there's no election coming up. He doesn't have to worry about it anymore. Now he can just kind of like do whatever he wants for the next 2 years. But the political consequences be damned.
So, Neal, let me ask you what you think about this. I mean, a part of me wants to see the GOP respond to this in the following way. And everybody's discussing, well, maybe they file a lawsuit, maybe they shut the government down, maybe they do this, maybe they do that. A part of me wants to see John Boehner just go out there in front of some cameras somewhere and say, are there some cameras on? Somebody get this on YouTube. I want this on the record, okay? We're going to let this pass. There's nothing we can do about it. But we want you guys to remember in 2020, when President Christie decides he's not going to enforce the law, the part of the law that says we have to send Social Security checks to people between the ages of 65 and 67, that you guys were okay with this. I mean, is that something that any Republican you could see ever could do or would do?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that would be terribly...
It would be great, though, and we always talk, he's got to do it with a cigarette in his hand.
Yeah, he would have to just kind of stamp out the cigarette on the podium after he's done and just, toss the butt into the press pool. But no Republican will do that. No Republican should do that. It's emotionally satisfying, I think, for us to think about that. But I mean, that would obviously be, horribly, politicized, and it would look terrible. I think what we have here is obviously the problem with the executive overreach, which has been happening over several presidents. It's not just Barack Obama. He's standing on the shoulders of other presidents there. But I think we also have Congress, multiple Congresses, which have written overly broad laws. Terrible laws, badly written laws. They just, the Affordable Care Act, just, 2,000 pages? How can anybody understand that when they're passing it? They're passing laws. They're not reading these laws. They don't understand all the ramifications of these laws. And where there's that sort of confusion, someone who speaks with a singular voice, like the president, the bully pulpit, can come in and say, well, this is my interpretation of this law, and I'm going to, enforce it the way that I feel it should be enforced. I feel I'm faithfully executing this law. So, yeah, I think partly it's a precedent that has been set over multiple presidencies, and I also think that it's a problem with Congress. I don't think that the current Congress or the upcoming Congress will really be able to outmaneuver this one. And nothing that I've seen in the past several years tells me that they're going to be able to overcome Barack Obama's political judo.
So speaking of horribly written laws, it's time again for us to discuss Obamacare as we approach the open enrollment period. And I think more importantly, as people are going to start getting ready to prepare their taxes next year, a lot of people are going to be facing some very significant sticker shock that was specifically written and built into the bill as one of the wisest things they did to impact the American consumer after the 2014 elections. Megan McCardle had a great article in Bloomberg the other day talking about all of the many ways in which people are about to be surprised by the price tag that's associated with Obamacare. And we kick this off by noting that Gallup has observed just last Friday in a poll that Obamacare is at this point it's at its least popular ever. It is now more unfavorable and less favorable than it has ever been in history. And that is without taking into account that people are about to see premium increases on the exchanges. Silver plans are estimated to go up their premiums by about 9%, bronze plans by significantly more than that. Low range estimates I've seen are about 13% premium increases, high range between 25 and 30% increases. The penalty when people fill out their tax returns is going to be larger than a lot of people expect. A lot of people have been led to understand and believe that the penalty for non-compliance is $95. That's true, half true, except that the full text of it is it's $95 or 1% of your income, whichever is greater. So somebody who makes $50,000 and is expecting a $95 penalty is actually going to be facing a $500 penalty. That penalty will be directly deducted from tax returns that many people are expecting to get on April the 15th. Some people who go to do their taxes this year are going to learn they got too much in subsidies through no fault of their own. The government gave them too much subsidies, government's going to take it back out of their tax return. If their tax return is not enough to cover it, government's going to say you got to send us a check for that difference. That's another way people are about to get sticker shock. Tax returns themselves are going to be much more difficult to prepare. People who are used to going to the H&R Block paying for 1 hour of preparer time are going to be facing 2 or 3 or 4 hours. That time is not cheap. It's going to increase their tax preparation bill from $200 to $400 or $500 in most cases. Businesses are about to find out that many of their health care plans that they thought were compliant are not in fact compliant due to regulations that were issued by the Department of Labor after the election, just within the last week or so. The penalty for noncompliance for these plans that they have paid for their employees is $100 a day. That's $36,500 a year per employee. Now, if you're a small business, you have 4 employees, we're talking $140,000, $150,000 of penalties. There are not many small businesses that are going to be able to survive that kind of a tax hit on tax day. I think a lot of small businesses are just going to flat out close, and you're going to have people losing their job as a result of this. So as we look at this, and I know we beat this issue to death, and I'm going to take this to Bill first. Is this now the time? Do we bring it back up again? Do we allow Ted Cruz to take the reins and say, listen, something's got to be done. We got to have this fight over defunding it, over repealing it, over shutting down the government if necessary. Is there a point at which it becomes so unpopular that it makes sense to pick up that stick again, or do we just allow it to go forward?
Well, we do not have even close to a veto-proof majority. So any vote we take right now will be, purely symbolic. But why not? Why not take one, purely symbolic vote? Let's not do another 50. That gets a little redundant after a little bit. So I think the GOP would do well just to hold, one little vote. Because just in case the American people did not figure out where the GOP stands on Obamacare, we'll have one more vote. In terms of some of these corrections, the administration has once again used its executive pen to delay some of these mandates. It's used its pen to delay the small business mandate, but. If we could actually see some movement, and I think there are a few votes in the Democratic Senate, a few Democratic votes in the Senate that could actually help Republicans to say get rid of, in a bipartisan manner, get rid of the medical devices tax and these sorts of policies, I think we could actually start to see some movement and some course correction. So I feel like that is the best use of Republicans' time now that they're in the majority. The party and no thing isn't going to work, and it's definitely not going to help us outmaneuver Barack Obama and whoever the Democrats put up in 2016 if we're not showing movement on how we're going to get some reforms done.
Scott, do you agree with that? Do you think that the smart play for the Republicans right now is to work with the administration to fix some of the more obvious issues and problems with Obamacare and make it a more solid and possibly popular bill? Or do you think the right move is instead to say, listen, you guys made your bed, you're going to have to lie in it. Either you repeal the whole thing or we let the whole thing stand as it is, and we'll take this issue back up after 2016?
Yeah, I'm much more in the latter camp. I'm not for shutting down the government over it. Not because I think there was the disastrous political play that some people claim, last year was, but much more because I think that you lose political clout and political strength by eliminating this horrible policy's horribleness. As you fix and tweak, then you lose the ability to actually implement real reform. The reality is that there's not a lot in the Obamacare framework that is worth salvaging, at least from we radical free marketers' perspective. Thus, it seems that the only smart strategy is to, as horrible as it sounds in a way, to let the voters lie in the mess they've made, and then to attempt to propose a sound free market, or at least freer market solution, something that can truly replace the god-awful mess that has been foisted upon us. There are too many examples in the past of massive government programs being tweaked to the point of being so firmly embedded in society that they can never be removed. The last thing we want to do is do that again with Obamacare. So you know what? Let the pain, let the ridiculousness continue for a bit, but get an alternative together. And that's really where the Republican Party has, in my opinion, been such an abject failure over the last year. And that it's to have any sort of agreement or even a debate about alternative plans. There's been nothing other than just being the "we're not Obama" party, which, look, it worked in 2014, that's fine, but guess what, guys, now you're in charge, you better do something.
Well, in fairness, Scott, to the Republicans, they've said some things. The problem is the things they've said are very bad. For instance, they've said, well, we want to keep the part of the law that says that you can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, but we're going to get rid of the individual mandate. Well, you put those two things together, and what you have is a system where nobody gets health insurance until they get cancer. I mean, that's the bottom line, and the private sector health insurance cannot survive in such a world. I mean, to me, those two pieces are interlocked. You can't have one without the other. So, wrapping up that particular discussion, we're going to close off here with a little bit more pop culture, and I want to talk a little bit about some box office review of this particular year. I know Bill is itching at the bit to get at this particular topic. If you look at the box office results for this year, 2014, only 4 of the top 30 movies of this year are what can be described as adult comedies. Kid comedies, to me, are a totally different species for reasons I'll get into later. But led by 22 Jump Street, talking at number 10 at about $190 million in the box office. And what you see, I think, a lot of times is that a lot of the comedic, both acting and writing talent is being drawn to the smaller screen where their talents are more valued because it appeals to the 1945 demographic that the advertisers crave. Bill, have we seen the death of the big screen adult comedy?
I don't think we've seen the death of the big screen comedy. I think what we're seeing is the peak of the cult following that Judd Apatow has amassed. I think we're going. One of the advantages of the silver screen is the fact that there's a diversity of comedy out there. Whereas if you look at the major comedies that are coming out right now, it's mostly focused on the crass and the juvenile rather than your I guess your Animal House type National Lampoon style comedy that we saw back in the 70s. So I'm hoping we can see a renaissance of a bit more wit and a few less dick jokes in terms of our comedy. As far as one place that's thriving right now, I think we're seeing the resurgence of actually hilarious kid shows. Wreck-It Ralph, Lego Movie, I think was the top 3 grossing this year, and that was a fantastic movie, very funny, and just happened to have Lego characters in it. Same thing with Wreck-It Ralph. So I'm hoping that we'll continue to see the resurgence of this Looney Tunes style, actually funny for adults, kid comedies, for lack of a better word.
Well, Neal, if you think about what's driving a lot of the changes, and for better or worse, I think more of the movies that are being produced are of the the kind of the action adventure genre, regardless of whatever you think of the quality of them.
Sure.
And I think that part of that is that it has become so prohibitively expensive to go to the movies, and conversely, it's become so easy to stream movies or have them delivered to your home as compared to what used to be 5 or 6 months after it came out, that movie studios are looking for something that will actually draw people to a movie theater experience. And so one way you can do that very easily, of course, is you can put in a bunch of CGI effects and loud noises that people are going to want to experience actually in the theater. The other and easier way is to make a movie that kids are going to drag their parents to see. And so I think that Bill has really hit on something here, that they have improved, I think, the quality of the kid-centered comedy and used that as something to draw people into the theaters. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I think that's absolutely correct. I think that's where the studios are directing most of their energy, and that's fine. I happen to love all the Pixar films. I want to go see this Big Hero 6 that's come out. That looks fun. I mean, I don't have children, but I still go to see these Pixar movies. I went to Up. I cried in the first 10 minutes of Up. I'm not ashamed to admit it. But I think the thing to look at with the comedies, when you're talking about the death of the big screen comedy, look at the example of, say, Neighbors, which was, according to this list, the 15th grossing movie of the year. It had a domestic gross of $150 million, foreign gross of $118 million. Its production budget was $18 million. Now that's a pretty good return on the investment, I think. Obviously, there's advertising and that sort of thing that comes into play. But if you can throw together a couple of comedians, horsing around on screen for $20 million, send it to the movie house and make $100 million. That's an incentive to keep producing these films. Now, whether they're going to be as many as there have been in the past, or whether they're going to be more like westerns, where there's sort of something that comes along every once in a while, and it's like, oh, okay, yes, the comedy is still an art form. We can still produce these things. The thing is, the movies that were, I think, in the top 30, they did very well when compared to their production budgets. So, and that's another, that's the same holds true for romance movies as well. They don't cost much because they typically don't have crazy special effects budgets or anything like that, and they get butts in seats sufficient to make back the budget and then some. So I think we will continue to see comedies, but obviously the main draw, of course, these days is the Marvel movies, the superhero films, the action adventures, and the kids cartoons.
Well, guys, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I want to thank our panelists for joining us, and we hope to make this a regular feature of Red State TV. I want to thank, once again, F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. Thank you, Jay Caruso, Pocket Full of Liberty, for joining us. Neal Dewing of the Federalist, and Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute. I've been your host, Leon Wolf of RedState.com. We appreciate you tuning in for our first week. We appreciate Aaron Gardner's work producing the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back again after the Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll see you at Red State.
Go Raiders!
Happy Thanksgiving.
I love this music.